everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. My name is Cameron English, joined as always by Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, it's great to see you. We were just jesting off camera, if you will, that it is pain day here on the podcast, either because we're talking about opioids or because the topic is particularly painful psychologically. And today, maybe it's both. How you doing?
A little both.
Okay, well, your story here, again, this one is very helpful. One thing I've always appreciated about Chuck, and of course I have a bias doing this podcast, is that you go to really complicated studies that are important for people to understand, and you break down the details so people can comprehend them. Because typically it's just left to the press release from the university, and then whatever the media figures out about the study and writes about it, which is often not particularly helpful. So this is a great article that you have here, and you're summarizing.
Thank you.
You're summarizing someone else's work, but again, this is a useful service you're providing. So the article is called "Opioid Boogeyman: ACSH Advisor Takes Mayo Clinic to Task for Its Pain Management Fairy Tale." Now, I got to say out of the gate, Chuck, this is a little feistier than I'm used to from you. You usually, and I've appreciated this about you, is you can take blistering criticism, wrap it in ambiguous language, and get almost anybody to read it. It's a gift. I don't know if it's the surgeon in you or what it is, but you came out swinging this time a little bit more. What do you make of that? What's going on here?
It may have been a bad day at the plant. I have to say that this calm exterior is a late development in my life. They did call me the demon when I was operating because I could turn and did turn on a dime if things were not going my way. So
very good.
In my defense, I would usually say, "Stop talking, stop helping me."
So Chuck was an acerbic individual for most of his career, and then he discovered stoicism or something, and
could very well be.
Okay, let me read the summary here, and then you can give us some of the highlights from your story. So you write, "It seems the Mayo Clinic is more interested in spinning a cautionary tale than sticking to the facts about opioid use for pain relief, and Red Lawhern isn't letting it get off the hook." In his latest article, the ACSH advisor calls out Mayo for promoting the fear-laden idea that opioid prescriptions practically guarantee addiction or worse. It turns out the real story in their data reads more like healthcare fails the vulnerable than one pill and you're hooked. But why let nuance get in the way of a good scare? Like I said, pouring on some extra Tabasco this week, Chuck. So clue us in. What is Red writing about, and then why is he and why are you so upset with Mayo for their analysis of their own data?
Well, he's taking the Mayo Clinic to task for continuing the mythology that physician prescribing behavior is the cause of our opioid epidemic and the overdose epidemic. And that has been a belief that has circulated since 2010, 2012. It really became a significant driver in 2010 moving forward with the new recommendations, CDC guidelines. And it's an interesting tale because in the late 1990s, physicians were told that we were not paying enough attention to pain. Pain was the fifth vital sign that we always had a check on, and that we were undermanaging pain. As I wrote in another piece on another day, students applying to medical school are very good about taking tests and answering the tests properly. We are curated to get into medical school by following the rules. And so when they told us that we weren't paying enough attention to pain, we all dutifully paid more attention to pain. And then 20 years later, when they told us, a little too much attention to pain, we dutifully stopped paying attention to pain. And that's why you can't get a prescription for an opioid, irrespective of what operation you've had in the hospital. Everybody gets, with reference back to a previous conversation, some Tylenol or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. You have to have lost an arm and perhaps a leg also to qualify to get a Percocet. And so that's been the ongoing myth, and the pain community has been up in arms because the pain community has lost a lot of their pain physicians and a lot of good pain management because of those misinterpreted guidelines. And in this case, the Mayo Clinic did a study looking at pain management, and what I said is that all the factual dots of the study are correct. It's just the fabric that they wove together to connect those dots that it is some kind of mythical fairy tale that's not even consistent with their own findings. So the study, which was published in the Journal of Pain, looked at individuals in a national cohort study looking at pain, one of our many national studies going on, and they were asked, during the past 12 months, have you taken any opioid pain relievers prescribed by a doctor, physician? And those that answered yes were asked whether they had been in the past 3 months. And using that information, they wanted to see whether these prescriptions had been given for appropriate reasons or what other factors seemed to be involved. And they looked at a number of things. They looked at where the person lived and whether it was urban or rural, all the usual predisposing factors, how old you were, whether you could pay for the medicines, a variety of issues. And they started with a population of about 20,000 participants, half of which filled out the survey. Out of that, they wound up with 395 for which they based their data. So right away, we got a small sample size going, but I'm going to spot them that. And so what they found is that and this is talking about people that had never taken an opioid before, that among this group, 4% of them were still taking an opioid a year after their initial prescription. And then they went further in breaking down who that group might be. And there was a range of people that were taking it. For instance, 1% were taking an opioid a year later, but they'd never seen a physician. So right away, we have some concerns about where those opioids were coming from. But again, we'll put that to the side. 10% of people that reported that pain management had been ineffective were still taking an opioid a year later, as were 11% of people that had been to the emergency department 3 times in the past year because of problems managing their pain. So, as it turns out, of all the various factors that they looked at, the need for analgesia was the primary reason people continued to take pain medicines. Duh.
Wait a minute. Okay, let me get this straight. People are taking medicines for the purpose those medicines are typically prescribed for. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
That is mind-shattering. My worldview is blown.
Well, in the world of Ozempic and Wegovy, that's not a surprise. Okay, this is the good news. This is good news in that world. We're not doing it. Nobody's using it off-label. They are using it because they have pain, and the reason that people are taking it for longer periods of time is that they still have pain. So that right away is an important point. But they looked at all sorts of other reasons. For instance, they found that people that had less education, that had high school educations, were nearly 3 times more likely to be taking an opioid a year later than people that had a college education. Well, why might that be? Could it be that people that don't have a college education have more jobs involving manual labor and therefore have more injuries? Yes. As it turns out, they have almost double the rate of injuries of people that have post-secondary education. They also found that people that had sleep issues, and don't we all, were again almost 3 times more likely to be taking an opioid a year later. But in that case, as it turns out, people that have chronic pain also have problems sleeping. So it becomes a little bit of a chicken-egg problem, which came first. And all of that was good. You can work your way through it, but it's when they get to their conclusion that their bias comes out. So they make 2 contradictory statements, and I'll just quote a little bit of both. Our study examined additional characteristics such as pain management approaches and their perceived effectiveness, both of which were strongly associated with incident opioid use. Combined, these data are consistent with best practice guidelines in that patients and providers may turn to prescription opioids when other less aggressive approaches fail. That's what we wanted people to do. We want them to start with less and work their way to opioids. So that's the first statement that they make. But then that doesn't go along with the narrative they want. So they end with this conclusion. Our data suggests that some participants are using opioids as a first-line or early resort analgesic instead of following best practice guidelines. You can't have it both ways. The data can't say both things. So pick which one is the case and go with it. As it turns out, if you look at the data, the places where the opioid use was consistent over a year was cases where pain management had been ineffective. They were using it, as we said just a moments ago, because they continued to have pain. And I can understand why this got past peer review, because you'd actually have to have read the article to notice some of the discrepancies. But they went on to share it with their patients as part of the Mayo Clinic's, patient portal and open access information. And why they would allow this contradictory data to be shared is really beyond me. As I end with, and this will go back to your thought that I was being a little more aggressive in my tone, I ended on this note because I just happened to like it. Rather than torture the data to give the conclusion desired, the researchers waterboarded their narrative to confess that evil opioids are still being misused and putting patients at risk. But as with most waterboard confessions, at some point the narrative will say anything to stop being further tormented.
What does this data tell you? Opioids are bad. Say it again.
That's right.
Okay. Well, as we wrap up here, that's a great point, right? You hit both things I wanted to. The heads I win, tails you lose nature of their analysis. And then what seems to me like willful confounding. Like they looked at all this data. There's reasonable explanations there. And you as a clinician were able to pick those out. You're like, well, people with less money do physical jobs, which cause all sorts of injuries, back injuries, knee injuries, et cetera, et cetera. It makes sense that they would use more of these drugs prescribed by a doctor. But nevertheless, we end up where we always end up, which is the dope sick painkiller narrative. These drugs have been abused, and they won't ever come out and say it, but what's sort of implied by stories like this is, poor people are kind of dumb and they're looking for relief from their awful lives, and so they're, using these drugs even if they don't need them. I wish they would just come out and say that, but they won't. It's this more patronizing sort of passive aggressive, Thank goodness we're here to put this in your patient portal so you...
Right, so you can, consume it. It's part of the opioids of the masses.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. You turned it around. I dig it. Okay. Well, this is good. Go read the story, everyone. One other thing I was going to ask you that just occurred to me. Did they do that thing when they promoted the study and they said, in a massive study of a national database, we found X, Y, and Z, or did they actually tell you it was like, oh, it's about 395 people?
No, the number involved was not clearly mentioned in any of the press releases, which is, no surprise. And again, another fascinating, I don't know what's going to happen with the new administration if they stop these national surveys, because researchers do not do their own research any longer. They just data mine the federal government's study. I mean, this study involved a cohort of people that were doing other things besides pain medications, but there was some pain medication questions in there, and that was enough to launch, a piece. And this is from the Mayo Clinic. This is not, some fly-by-night organization. This is people that built their empire on thyroid disease. I don't know if you knew this about the Mayo brothers, two surgeons, God bless them. But they were practicing up there in Rochester, Minnesota, where thyroid disease is endemic because of a lack of iodine. And so they were really pioneers in thyroidectomy, which was a significant problem in their day because people could develop what's called a thyroid storm. They would have a very brisk cardiovascular response, high blood pressure, very heart rate from thyroid storm, and it was unpredictable, and it when they were practicing surgeons, untreatable. So they had to get in and out pretty quick.
Wow.
There's a problem. And that's the Mayo brothers.
Yeah. So the organization has fallen quite far from its founders, it sounds like, to...
I don't think that they would characterize it that way. Because they were businessmen too, God bless them.
Okay. We'll leave it there. Actually, I thought of one other question. Would it be good or bad, or are you indifferent on the matter, if the new administration were to stop these surveys or pause them or prevent them from being used in research? How would that impact?
No, I think that they have. I think that they definitely have value. I think that the people jumping on board them in what was really secondary analysis, not really using the survey for the purposes that it was intended for, is problematic. But the truth is to do this kind of research on an original population would take 3 or 4 years and would cost a considerable amount of money. So this is a way of piggybacking or bootstrapping on work that's already done, but you got to recognize the fact that it's not as targeted as we might like it to be.
Very good. Well, go check out the story. Once again, it is called Opioid Boogeyman, ACSH Advisor Takes Mayo Clinic to Task for Its Pain Management Fairy Tale. Chuck pulling the gloves off this week on this very excellent story. That's on our website, acsh.org. If you go to the website, click the subscribe tab up top, punch in your email address. We'll send you the stories that we publish. The ones you read are the ones we typically talk about. And thank you so much for joining us and for reading our content. We greatly appreciate it. We hope you're benefiting from it. And we will see you next time.